And so I'm going to start and go through like kind of high level stuff, and then Adam can go through all of the CLI stuff, and Rudy can go through the server package. So hope this recording works properly. But I will share my screen. Okay. So here we have just the main repo open. And there's two main top level packages, or folders I should say, that are of interest: examples and packages. So this is where like the bulk of everything is in the code base. The examples directory is example Blitz apps. And so the store example currently is using basically all of the features. So like CSR, client-side rendering, server-side rendering, static pages. And so we're running like Cypress test against this as sort of like an integration test for Blitz currently. Now, plain.js is not working yet. And then Tailwind is simple, but it shows how to use Tailwind. So we can add more examples as we need. And eventually we'll have the code installer recipes, which will make examples like not as big of a deal, but it still might be nice to have them. So most of the code for Blitz is inside packages. Now this is a Yarn workspace. So if we open up the root package.json, you can see that this is a Yarn Workspaces project, and it's defining everything in packages to be a package and everything in examples to be a package. And so that means when you run Yarn at the project root, then it's going to install the dependencies for all of these projects. So if it's pretty simple. Like if you haven't used workspaces before, as long as you follow the instructions and like the contributing file, we have run the development set up. So clone the repo, run yarn, yarn dev, etc. You shouldn't have to worry too much about it. But then, so if we go to the top level package is the Blitz package. So this is packages/Blitz. And this is, there's not much to the Blitz package. Mainly what it does is consolidates all the other packages into one single export. It also wraps the CLI. So it allows you to do yarn global install Blitz, and then have the Blitz CLI available. And then inside a Blitz app, it lets you import everything from Blitz. So you don't have to worry about different imports. So if we go to source index, you can see it's exporting everything from Blitz core, which is currently the only package that is adding anything for users. So we'll look at that in a bit. And then we also have the CLI in the bin folder. And this is the very first file that always runs whenever you run Blitz. And so what this file does is if it checks to see if you're inside a Blitz app, and if you are, it delegates all the commands to the locally installed version of Blitz inside that app. That way you don't have any version conflicts. So you can use an old global a CLI installation with a newer app, and it'll work like you expect. So that's mainly what that does. It shouldn't have to change very often. I think that's all for the Blitz package. And I was going to mention that if you have questions, like throughout any of this, just unmute yourself and ask your question. Because this is for you also. If you want to know about something, like just feel free to speak up. Any questions about the Blitz package? while we're here.
What exactly do the test files in the Blitz package do? Like, as I like, basically does nothing but forward code to other packages, right?
Like this kind of test file, or
All right, yeah, okay, I see. It's a dummy. Okay.
um, but yeah, so there's not much to test in this package, but other packages do have, um, you can see here, test files in the test directory.
I was just wondering about the folder being there because I
Okay,
couldn't imagine any tests being written for the code in the Blitz
yeah,
package.
okay, yes,
But
yep,
yeah, it can make sense.
yeah. So eventually we might have some tests, but um, okay. So I'll go through the core package next, and this is also a pretty simple package. The Let's see. Actually, I should just open the index file. So there's only a few files in here, as you can see, pretty small. The first thing in this index file is it's exporting everything that's in this package. So use query, use paginated query, etc. And then it's re-exporting. All the rest of it is just re-exports from next. And so we're renaming things from like next page to Blitz page, next API request to Blitz API request. And then next has different exports for like next head, next link, and we just export those all together under one package. So that's all of that. And then one thing that's kind of can trip people up is their next provides two head components, one for the document page and then one for like general usage. And so we've renamed that to document head for the document. So that's a bit more clear. Actually use query and use paginated query are both fairly simple. They both are small wrappers around React query. So you can see up here at the top, we import React query and then some types. And then we export this use query function. And so we have a little bit nicer interface that works well with the way we like generate the RPC API. And the main thing that we're doing in here is getting the cache key. So when you use this query, you don't have to set the cache key like you do with just plain React query because we're automatically doing that for you. And then we also accept like all the React query options, and then we just pass those straight through. And then use paginated query is very similar.
So sorry to interrupt. So that
Oh, go
if
ahead.
we are like being opinionated about this key, like does it mean we don't have any way of? I haven't used React Query, but I use SWR, which
Right.
is kind of was the initial thing which React Query took inspiration from. And for example, using the cache key allows you to like invalidate stuff and propagate changes in a global way from one place of the application to another one, right? So
Right.
if we hard code the key kind of here, how can you potentially invalidate stuff if you are using the same? Are we taking into account that you should be always using the same function for the same kind of resources everywhere in your application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the okay, so first, the cache key and validation stuff is still something that needs a lot of work. Currently, we're not doing any cache and validation for you, and so you have to do it manually, basically by. So one thing that React Query returns is a refetch function, and so you can call that just to manually refetch the latest data to bypass the cache. Um, But what we want it to do is to have automatic and cache invalidation for like 90% of the use cases. So I think we can do some intelligent cache busting based on like the conventions of how we name queries, or like the folders that they're in. So like, for example, if you generate, like say you have a product model, and then inside apps / products / you have queries and mutations, like we could invalidate everything in that directory. So like anything like a create product mutation would invalidate the get product and get products mutation. So that's one way. The other way that we can do it is whenever you make a route change. So like, especially how we have it set up, we have an edit page. And so once you save that, you're probably going to redirect to a show page or a list page. And we could automatically invalidate the cache on like the next route. So if you make a router transition, we could automatically invalidate that cache. And then there's like, we could maybe do some things with TypeScript types and introspection. So this is something that Rudy and I like both have thought about, but we just haven't had time to really dig into. So it's something that if somebody's interested in it, you could like kind of dig into it and come up with some good ideas. We have there's a open issue for define query and mutation usage, and we talk about cache invalidation some in there. So that's a kind of a place to start if you want to look. And
Also,
then
I think like when you think about invalidating the cache, I feel like you could simply change the parameters, right? Because like if you have a look at line 23,
yes,
the cache key that's generated by us is just like one part of the cache, and when you change the parameters, you also invalidate the cache key because it's like equally part of the key.
right. That's true. So the other thing we can do is we could add some utilities in here that we return beyond what React Query provides, that like would be more intelligent or different things. So yeah, so we can make this as nice as we want.
Sure, cool, thanks.
That's a great question. Okay, so SSR query is a basically nothing right now, but we have it here because once we add HTTP middleware, which I'm hoping to do this week, then the middleware will be called in here automatically, just like with other queries and mutations. And then the RPC file is the client portion of the RPC code. And this is never used by like Blitz developers, like end users. This is used by the generated code that we can look at later for that automatically added RPC. So it takes in a URL and parameters, and then you can see it's doing a simple fetch call. And so this is where we need to do that error handling that Andreas was asking about for if the fetch returns like a 503 or something. And there is a RPC specification issue that kind of specifies like exactly how this works, of like what, basically it's always a post request, and it always returns an object with a result and an error key, and result could be the result of the query mutation, or an error would be null, or result is null and error is a stringified error, or a serialized error. And so we serialize the error on the server, and then we deserialize it here and throw it. So you basically, any error you throw on the server in a query or mutation will be like rethrown up on the client into your client code. So it's kind of like works exactly like you would expect. And then we have like, yeah, a few little, like, so we're warming the Lambda. If you have a, actually I think we're doing it all the time now, but it will be only for serverless. Once you have serverless in the config, we're just sending a head request, and what this does is it wakes up the Lambda if it's asleep, and it also connects to your database if you're using Prisma. So then it's it's ready to go. And we do that on page load. Like if you, any page, yeah, so it probably needs to be a little bit more intelligent, but it's working okay for now. And I think that's basically it for the core package. Any other questions for here in the core package?
You mentioned the. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead. It's okay.
Well, I was going to ask about this HTTP middleware you say you want to implement this week, which I'm not aware of. Maybe just a link to an issue is enough.
One of you, can one of you paste it in the chat, either in Slack or in the Zoom chat?
Yeah, I just pulled it up. I'll put it in the Zoom chat here.
Cool. Okay. Oh yeah, Rudy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that that isomorphic RPC function is kind of designed so that the RPC could be kind of called from anywhere. So if you can call this client sort of RPC on the server, and it's just, as you can see there, it's just checking to see if we're in the client. If so, then it's going to make the actual RPC call to the server. If not, it's just going to call the resolver that it gets passed.
Good. Yep. Okay. So then we have the CLI package, the generator package, and the installer package, which are all on Adam's domain. So do you want to take it from here, Adam, and walk through those? Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Let me go ahead and share here. Oh, I think you have to invite me to share. It says host disabled screen sharing.
Let me just 1 second. Okay.
There we go. All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on your time zone, everyone. So as Brandon mentioned, I am taking most of the charge of the CLI stuff now. And so let me try and move all the Zoom panels out of the way. So most of the core of this code, like Brandon mentioned, starts in the CLI package here. And so let me, will VS Code not zoom in on this panel? All right. So we use Oak Cliff as our CLI command generator. And so basically in our config, everything that's in this commands directory is automatically going to get picked up and exposed as a CLI command with the commands information that gets opened up in the console just as static properties on the class, which is just the out-of-the-box functionality we get there. We really don't do any customization there. And so if you're looking for like current CLI functionality and what we currently support, this commands directory is your source of truth here. Anything that's in this directory is exposed in some way. And Oak Cliff gives us the capability to have work in progress code out in like published in production, but not exposed. So we have currently a couple of commands that are hidden, which you can see here. Okay. So we can hide files or hide commands from the CLI, which allows us like things like Brandon mentioned, the recipe installers. We can have versions in development which doesn't require us to have like long running feature branches in GitHub, which is nice. And so I'm not going to run through all of these commands, but the important thing to know is some of these we have custom written. So things like Blitz new uses our custom generator package, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the installer and the generator all have a bunch of custom code in them. We also have other commands like database, which for the most part, there's a bunch of stuff here, but for the most part, a lot of this is just like proxying to Prisma calls. And so We do have a lot of dependencies on our third parties here, which is a good thing because it allows us to maintain less of our own code. I'm not going to walk through each of these commands in detail. The other thing that we have here in the CLI package is a few handy utilities for building new commands. So things like detecting whether or not you're in a Blitz project and loading in Blitz configs and things like that. But other than that, the CLI package is actually pretty dumb. Most of what it does is proxies out to the other packages that I'll talk about here. So the next up is the generator, and the generator is where the majority of our the like magic of Blitz CLI happens, right? Like one of the exciting parts about Blitz is that it can generate a lot of code for you, and it's getting smarter about the code it generates. So Brandon recently added the form generator, which when you generate pages will also generate a sample form component for you. I have a PR up right now to generate actual Prisma models, and then there's one that I'm working on a branch that'll be up soon that actually uses your database models to generate pages and queries and mutations, so that will actually, if you have a task model, for example, in your Prisma schema, and you run Blitz generate all task, we will generate pages that read from that model and use those fields rather than right now. I think we just like assume you have an ID and a name and a description field. And so we'll fix all of those, and we same thing with queries and mutations. We will automatically fill. If we might be able to get more sophisticated there and give you like filtering and things like that, where we can like generate actual examples based on your data model rather than right now where it just kind of does a find all or find one and that's it. So these generator classes are essentially written as an event loop. And so this is the base generator class that every generator must extend, as you can see by our very helpful detailed documentation here. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in here that we don't need to worry too much about. We just for convenience and child classes expose things like memfs editor and inquire, and then some configuration that children can set, things like whether or not to enable prettier and whether or not to enable or disable the conflict generator. And then as we get into the actual generator code, right now we don't have any like pre-process hooks because we haven't had a need for them, but they're pretty trivial to add. But the lifecycle starts at the run command. So if we are not doing a dry run, if we're doing a dry run, it doesn't actually matter where we run this code, because all we're going to do is like generate the diffs and then output what would be written to the console. So we don't actually need to worry about our current directory here. And then as you can see, this like the run loop is pretty simple. We just execute our write function, which is the same for every generator. You can overwrite this, but this is the only time you would do that is if you're generating non-templated files, or modifying existing files, for example. And then we give you a pre-commit hook if you need to make any changes. So
talk about how the memfs works a little bit, like how it's kind of gives you this.
I'll dive into the write function in a sec, and then pre-commit just gives us. We have some commands that need hooks to run after we edit all the files. So in that new app generator, for example, we want to generate a git ignore file, but you can't have an actual git ignore in the template directory because it'll ignore a bunch of files in the template. And so we rename that to something that won't get picked up as a git ignore, and then we use this pre-commit hook to move files. So few use cases there, but it's nice to have. And then the end here is this conflict checker, which plays nice with memfs editor, which I can talk about now. That lets us handle file conflicts and overwrite operations automatically rather than having to rebuild that from scratch every time we make a new generator. So so this write function is where all the interesting stuff happens, as Brandon alluded to with the memfs editor stuff. So the core of that code is here, where we get your target directory based on the config in your generator class, and then we template the file for you. We use a custom templating format, which is described in this package's README. Basically, anything wrapped with double underscores on either side will get picked up and have its value replaced based on the object that was passed in, similar to how like handlebars would do it with curly braces or anything else. And so your generator can pass in any arguments, and then we will just pass those straight along to the template. And that gets done here with MFS copy. So we used to use EJS, which would use the copy template function. We moved away from that because it's not valid TypeScript. And so your templates can't be valid TypeScript. And it's hard to know if your code is going to work before you actually like run the generator. And so this makes your templates a little bit easier to read. And so every time you generate a file, this process function gets called by the library, in which we just give it a few options, the actual path that we're generating, the values object, and any prettier options to pull in. And then this process function reads the file out of a buffer. Any conditionals in the file, we can't just do obviously like a string replace, but our templating engine supports that. So we use recast to do that. So we actually read in an AST of the file. We read out your conditional statements that use that use your template values, and then can like conditionally insert blocks of code into the templates, which has proved pretty useful recently. And then the template replacement itself is just a pure string replace. And then if this is not a TypeScript project, we use Babel inline to transform the file from TypeScript to JavaScript and then output it. And then right at the end here, obviously run prettier on anything that we generate, so that the files that we're generating match the code style in the existing project. And we read out of the project's prettier config here, so that it doesn't matter what global prettier options we have set, we'll read out of your config. So anything that you've customized will get picked up here. So that this is one of like the nice cool things that we have built into the generator that we'll continue to iterate on, is that like the generator knows about your project's code style and code settings and will conform to it. And so future adaptations there include things like being able to create custom templates and keep them in your project. So we'll likely support a templates directory or something similar, where you can actually run a command to copy one of our templates into your project and then rename it. And then you can have like a custom Atoms, Blitz page template that you can use instead of the built-in page templates. And so that's something that's on the backlog that I'd like to get to fairly soon, since it's not too complex and provides a lot of really exciting stuff for Blitz.
Is there a specific reason that like all files are interpreted as TSX files, like in line 173? I think we already talked about like differences between TSX parsing and normal TypeScript parsing.
Yeah, so right now that was mostly just to get things working, and it was easier than building out the conditional logic. The interesting thing here is right now I guess not that interesting, is that we control all the templates right now, right? Like there's no code in the templates that's external. And so I just know for a fact that all of our templates use valid TSX syntax, and we don't use any syntax that requires us turning TSX support off and actually like paying attention to the file extension. But it isn't too hard to update this, like add a similar condition inside of this block that will test for whether or not it's
later,
a TSX file.
because like when we have like user custom templates, that would be a thing we should.
Yep. Yeah. That's something I'm aware of, and I know that we need to make this a little bit smarter and actually detect the file that we're using. And also, like, we should turn off TypeScript support if we're parsing JavaScript files and things like that. But again, for right now, all of our templates are TypeScript, and all of them support TSX syntax. But yeah, it's something that I think I opened up an issue for this a while back to make this a little bit smarter in terms of what Babel plugins we use. Any other question?
Yeah, but I don't want to break your flow in going through.
No, that's fine.
But maybe, so you feel free to address this at some point whenever that is good. So I was wondering on how those generators would work if you have like some overlapping functionality. So you showed this form generator, or you didn't show it so much, but there is this form generator, and somebody will use, I don't know, hook form, final form, you name these things. So is there but I'm asking for the concept. Is it so that you then kind of extend the generator or have a plugin thing where you alter the way the generator works, or you totally replace it and say, okay, use final form generator or your fancy form generator? So what's the idea?
There's a few options there. So we do have an issue open for plugin support, which one of the hooks that I expect to build into plugins is to be able to expose templates. And so ideally what I'd like is to be able to have some kind of universal keys for template categories. So for example, your plugin can export a file path to a form template. And then if you do Blitz generate form, we can show you a selector and say, hey, like you have these form template generators registered in your project. Which one do you want to use? And allow users to select and define defaults. So, right, if you always want to use final form because you never want to use our less than exciting generated form, you can just default to that. And then every Blitz generate form from that point on will use final form. And then the other option there, right, is supporting custom templates where a plugin can just specify custom templates, and then just Blitz generate final form will just work out of the box because the final form plugin can define custom template names. But the idea there is that like we kind of expect users to get relatively limited value out of our generated templates, and that the real power comes from being able to eject them and then override them, right? So if you say, we support you ejecting the page template, really what we'll do is we'll just copy this directory into the templates directory in your project, and then you can modify this however you want. And you can even create multiples of them, right? You can create as many of these as you'd like, and then again, like I said, at generate time, we can either allow users to select defaults or just pass in an argument for which one of the page templates they'd like to use. And then that's going to allow users to say, rather than having like one page template that needs to be customized and extended and have a bunch of conditional logic in order to handle all of this, you just define 10 different page templates based on the use case.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think that would lead to a question about like conflict resolution. But you will get there eventually, I think.
Yeah, so we can talk about that right now. So I mentioned that we have this conflict checker, which isn't incredibly smart right now, but it does handle everything we need. So if there's an existing file that you try and write into, we'll show a message in the console that says, would you like to overwrite with these changes, show the changes, or skip the commit, basically. And we'll show the diff in the console with the old file and the new file, and you can look at the changes and say, yes, I want to commit this, or no, I want to skip it. And so that process is interactive. It goes file by file and walks you through it. And so this has actually been already incredibly helpful in developing the generators, in that you can run the generator, make some changes, rerun it, and see the difference in the output as you rerun the generator. And this is also what out of the box supports, as you can see, dry runs and things like that. So we automatically skip the actual commit when you're in a dry run. If there's a conflict, if there's already an existing file there, we will let you know that there's conflicts and give you, like I said, these options to override, skip, or show the changes. And so, yeah, so the conflict checker is interactive, and so we've already handled that on a basic level. At someday we might want to get more sophisticated about it, similar to how, like if you've ever used git stash patch, and it lets you like interactively chunk by chunk walk through your code base, and we don't want to do something similar where if there's a bunch of conflicts in a file, you might want to commit some and skip others. And that's something that is a nice to have, but I think so far, based on our use cases, it's pretty unlikely that people are going to be like regenerating the same pages at the same paths. It's more likely that you're going to scaffold a page in a new folder and then make a bunch of changes to it. But it's unlikely that you'll like regenerate that page again. So if I run Blitz generate pages tasks, it's pretty unlikely that at some point in the project's future, I'm going to rerun that command. And it's much more likely that I'll have just like customized that component and won't need the scaffolded components anymore. Any other questions before we keep going?
Adam, we should probably try to. You're doing great, but we should probably try to speed it up a little bit so we don't get
Yeah, I wasn't watching the clock too much. Yeah, sorry, that was my.
No, it's been fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So I open up a template here. This is what they look like. They're like a little bit chaotic because there's underscores everywhere. But like I said, pure string replacement, and then we using process env supply in conditional statements, like I said before. So it creates really nice, elegant models that still look pretty much like plain TypeScript components. And then if we want, in order to get to the server stuff, so Rudy has time to walk through all of that stuff, we can skip the installer for now, and then we can come back to that if we have time at the end, Brandon. That was pretty much it for the generator already.
Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe show what like the app generator looks like, or
yeah,
just like
the actual
yeah. So there's the
yeah.
a class for each generator.
Yeah. So there's two categories of generators. One of them is like the really basic one where most of the functionality for a generator comes out of the box. So if you provide like what directory the output goes into, where your template is actually located, and then these are the only two. This is the only method you really have to implement, which is get template values and actually give the template object to be passed into the template. And then there's some other hooks that you can provide, like a function that's more gives you more control over where the files are actually output. So we use this for context generation or parent model generation. And then everything else here is just helpers. So this is like the most basic generator class where everything just kind of works for you. You don't have to hook into any of the hooks or anything. The app generator is a little more complex. So this is where we take advantage of the pre-commit hook to update the git ignore file. We use the post-write hook to, this is what installs your package.json dependencies, and then execute the conflict checker and actually, or sorry, that happens in the generator. This is the code to actually give the nicer output. So if you do a yarn install, we'll give you a step-by-step with just like loading spinners rather than like all of the gross yarn output here. So that's what's happening here. Run prettier, and then actually initialize the Git repository and commit the changes in Git is what this commit is, not the conflict checker. And we will show you if these commands fail. We're going to assume that you don't have Git because there's no real other reason that these commands should fail, given that we're running them in a new clean directory. So like I said, with the hooks that we expose to you, you can get pretty sophisticated and pretty complex with your generators, depending on how fancy you want them to be. And then, of course, we have something like the model generator, which is in PR right now, which rather than using the built-in write function, overrides it. So this loses the ability to copy files on demand. But in the case of models, we're modifying the existing Prisma schema, so we don't want to do that. So yeah, so we just generate a string, append it to the file, and eventually this will get smarter, and we'll be able to like edit existing models and things like that. But yeah, the generator classes themselves are actually pretty simple and straightforward.
Okay, cool. Any questions for Adam before we go on to Rudy? Okay, Rudy, why don't you go ahead and let me make you the host. All right, Adam, I think you need to make him the host.
Host disabled, yeah.
I'm the host now. Rudy, yeah.
Okay, all right.
You're in charge.
Have the power. Okay, now I've got some desktop. Does that work? Allowed to share my screen. Yeah. Oh, great. I'm going to change my system preferences. Won't be a second. There we go. Oh, and I'm going to have to quit in order to do that. All right. I'll be back in a minute, guys. I'm really sorry.
Okay.
Oh no, there's that. Yeah.
Wait, I see you.
Oh, did that work?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I see your screen.
Awesome. Sweet. You can see my screen. That's great. Okay, so you can see VS Code?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, hi guys. My name's Rudy. Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the server package in Blitz. Server package is basically the idea behind it. It's basically its job is to try to manage kind of the server component of a Blitz application. And so this is going to be running when you, if you're developing a Blitz app, it's going to be starting and stopping next. It's going to be building all of your source files into a format that Next understands. It's basically the core sort of model that we're using is we're compiling to Next. So we take users' source files and we transform them and put them into a folder, which is then the development folder that Next will use to run. And we take that sort of approach and also apply it to the build step as well. So we build out a Next app, and so and that's how we can then share Blitz applications, which are actually Next applications. So I'll start by going through this. So here we are in source, and if we start off with the CLI, is probably a good place to start. If we go quickly back up to here, we've got our commands, and let's just have a look at the Blitz start command quickly. With Blitz start, depending on the flags you pass to it, it'll either execute this prod command, prod function here, and the prod comes from Blitz server, and that's our entry point into the server. So we pass in some config, and there's also dev down here, and with dev we're doing some stuff in parallel, so that's this run Prisma generation stuff here. But actually let's go into dev. I think that's probably where most of the meat is. And okay, of course we're in here in our get out of there. Actually, just go straight to the source code. So there's the source code here, and actually I'll get rid of that because that's probably there we go. Yeah, and so if we have a look here in dev, we're going through, basically we're taking that configuration, we're sort of normalizing it and through this enhance function here. Maybe that should be called normalize, I'm not sure. But basically within that, we're sort of getting all of these so that they, we know what folder you're in, and we know where things are, and we know sort of how you want to treat the command. The way this has been built, we're trying to sort of functionally extract all of that information up to the top so things are very configurable. And so down here, I guess the most important sort of part of this, so at the bottom here you can see that we've got next start here, but the biggest part of this this package, and something I think we'll probably end up extracting out to its own package at some point, is this synchronize files function. And what that does is that basically takes in your configuration and it goes through and sets up a pipeline to take, which is built up of a whole lot of transform streams, node transform streams, and they take vinyl files. We're using vinyl files, comes from Gulp.js, if you're familiar with it. But basically we take a big set of transform streams, and we through each step of the transform streams, we transform the files. And I'll work through, in fact, if we go into the synchronizer folder, which is where the synchronized files comes from, there's a README here. And this README, maybe I can actually quickly show you guys. So if we open the preview on that README, you can see we talk about the synchronizer and talk about streams and sort of some decisions here that have been made. And we talk about the broad architecture. And I think this is kind of, if you need to work on this area, this is a good place to start, is to go through and have a look at this file, because it's going to sort of explain a little bit of how things work. And it's probably easier to look at this than look at the code necessarily initially. But basically the idea here is we've got these two sources of files. We've got a watcher, and we've also got like a glob function. And so basically what they do is they then collect all the files up and then send them down through this pipeline. And so it turns into this component called agnostic input. And so that's just going to basically, everything past this point is getting sent down as vinyl files. And so we have an input. We then enrich that input, and I'll go through this in code in a minute. There's at this point in time we've got this thing called the optimizer. It's not really doing much optimization except just tracking kind of the work that has to be done and the work that is yet to do, and just making sure we don't do any work twice. And then we run through probably the more interesting parts of this, which is a set of rules. And these rules are kind of dynamic, and they're going to change as Blitz grows. But basically, each one of these rules is a separate sort of stage, and sort of contributes in a new thing. I guess it's kind of a bit like the different generators in the generator package, in that they're sort of like plugins to this system. And so with a rule can transform a file, or it can actually place new files onto the queue, or it can actually just add more files to the pipeline. And then at the very end, there's a writer, and the writer is going to write to the file system, and then we have some stuff that's just sort of tracking what's been done. And just that this optimizer links up to that one and just checks what's done and what's yet to do. And then there's also a thing to say, hey, we're ready. So I'll just quickly I'll start walking through that. So I'll show you the code. But yeah, so if you want to have a look at that file, have a read of it. This talks about sort of how a lot of this stuff kind of works and the ideas behind it. So, okay, so if we'll start off. So we'll start off here. So this is that synchronizer function, and we can have a look through here. So we got the synchronized files, and so basically the main sort of point of this here is to set up. It basically is to set up this pipeline here. So this create pipeline function here. So that creates this file transformer, and then we're piping everything from a source into the file transformer. If we look at the source, we've got this agnostic source creator. So agnostic source creator, that's what I was talking about before, when what it's doing is it's here we've got a vinyl file stream here, and we then also have a watch stream, and this merges those streams right into a single one, and then we can we just have a single entry point, and then from that point onwards, all we've got is a bunch of vinyl files. And vinyl files are they're basically just sort of metadata objects that represent files in a file system. And what you can do, Gulp uses it so you can transform streams, copy them to different destinations, change the content of files, and so on. And you can do that without actually writing to the file system. And so at the very end of your stream, you write to the file system, because that's the expensive operation. Okay, so so that was the agnostic. That was an agnostic source. So then we start with this pipeline. So we have a look into this pipeline here. And this is kind of like this is sort of like the configuration of or the orchestration component of this this part of the code. So basically what's happened here is this is how we set up our pipeline. We have our input. So this is a node, I think this is from Pumpify. So this is creates like a pipeline stream here. So the stream starts here, it runs through, you can sort of combine streams together here in sequence. And yeah, so it starts at the input here. And then the first thing we do is we enrich the files here. Enriching the files, what that does, if we go through to there, all it's doing is just adding a hash to the file. So each file gets its own hash. And then, oops. And then, and that's just sort of so we can track the file and track the file as a piece of work. then what happens is we're creating a cache of those files, so that we can sort of have a list that we can use within the rest of the system. And so we expose that. So here we have an object that we send to each one of these rules that we can use in order to sort of get the state of the system. So and that might make a bit more sense once we're talking about sort of the structure of a rule. I'll get into that in a minute. I think we could maybe name them something else. I'm not very happy with the name rule. There's probably a better name, but I haven't really come up with a better one. So if anyone's got any suggestions, feel free to open an issue on it. But basically, what we have here is these are the rules that sort of make up Blitz at the moment. We have this relative, so we have like all the rules are in this rules folder here. So we have a relative rule, and so that's just converting relative file paths to absolute file paths. So that's enabling us to have, like .. in our app code. So that then turns it into absolute paths. So there's one here for the,
I just want to interject here that like all of this is intimidating to me. I'm just, for everyone watching, but most of this doesn't have to change very often. And like adding features to Blitz most of the time does not require any changes in here. So most of the like what needs to happen is already here, and then it's just like small changes occasionally. So if this intimidates you, don't worry about like thinking that you can't contribute to Blitz. So most of the features to add are probably going to be in the core package, which I went over, which is like fairly simple, and then in the CLI, the generator stuff. So just wanted to put that out there.
Sure. Yeah, I think, and if you are going to contribute stuff to this area, you're probably going to be writing a rule, and so it's going to be, you'll be making one of these. They're kind of like plugins to this system, and I suppose a good one to look, maybe if I'll go through a few of these rules and just sort of explain what they do without getting into too much detail. But so the config one, for example, so this is handling like how, like when we change like from next config to Blitz config, and so that's sort of just making sure that we've got the business rules right for that. So so for example, you can see here, so we're writing out some like writing out into this next config that we're writing. That's for the generated next application, for example. And so there's a few things that can happen here. This is sort of a functional style of programming. So what we're sort of doing is we're running this function which kind of generates a stream. And so this is like a node stream, and the stream is the thing that gets inserted into the pipeline. And so as the file comes through the stream, we can transform that file, or we can create a new file, add it to the start of the pipeline, or just simply add it there and then in the middle of the pipeline. So that's kind of sort of how that's working. So this is covered in that README. So if you have a look through the README, it should make a bit more sense. So this is so this manifest thing here, I think this will probably get a little bit of love soon. But basically, this is around how we're sort of redirecting errors from like when you get an error in your Blitz app, and that error is going to display in the browser. When you click through to that error, if we didn't have the manifest there, a manifest is basically just it's kind of a lookup table, so that when you click through basically it's going to redirect you to the correct original source file. Now this, I'm pretty sure this has got a few like edge case bugs in it, and I'm expecting to have to look through some of that and fix it up. But it sort of works for now. It's sort of like part of our initial prototype, and so yeah, we've got it in there for now. But it will be something we'll probably have to fix up at some point. This is the pages rule here. So this is doing things like changing all of these, copying all the paths from. So there's some tests for some of the functions in here. So just sort of copying paths from your user space into the next space, and then we've got some the RPC stuff here. So this is the logic for trying to
so that
for the RPC.
The pages thing you just covered is like how we you can have multiple pages folders inside a Blitz app, but then we compile it all into a single pages folder for next to run. That's what that was.
That's correct. Yes, that's right. So then yeah, so this RPC stuff. So what's happening here is we're generating the two ends of the RPC call. So from basically you just write the server side component, and what we do here is we organize that so that the client side component is generated and will talk to the server side component. So you can see here there's some templates, and you know how I talked about that isomorphic RPC stuff before, how you can run it on the server and the client. This is sort of where it's used. So it's used in this template here, and you can have a dig through that and have a look at how that works. Yeah, and then there's this write here, and currently write, that's just like a gulp plugin, pretty much using a gulp plugin to send it to the vinyl file system destination. So that's the thing that gulp uses, and that's actually pretty simple. This probably shouldn't be here as a rule. I think it should probably just be part of like, so basically the way this is sort of structured is rules should really be stuff that's kind of Blitz specific, and these helpers should be more about this idea of just moving files from one place to another. And I think maybe in a refactor soon we'll move that out to here. But yeah, and so you can see, you get a good picture of it here if you look at this file here. So this is the index on, yeah, so this is, sorry, that's the index within the pipeline folder. The synchronizer will probably eventually be its own package. So, and there'll be, just because it's sort of a little separate from this idea of managing the Blitz server. So that's sort of just a basic kind of overview of the structure of it. Like I said, it's reasonably complex, and mainly because it uses streams, and streams require a slightly different way of thinking to the way you might think when you're writing something that's a bit more imperative. But actually, it's really good to mess around with streams. I think they're pretty core to know. Like everything in FS is actually just dealing with streams. Express, for example, like request and response, they're just streams. So it's really good to sort of play around with it. I think I learned a lot actually putting this together too, because it's been an interesting problem to solve. But one of the cool things about using streams is that it's really fast. So what we found, we tested it with, how many files was it? Like 10,000 files, and it built them. Yeah, it built them really quickly. So it sort of it was faster than I expected it to be, and it's probably why I had an idea to do a bit more work on this optimizer and try and get it to be really smart in terms of when it starts up, and it only will then copy stuff that hasn't changed. So it'd be a bit intelligent about that, but there hasn't been the impetus to do that because it's kind of, so far it sort of seems fast enough, and we might sort of wait until people are working with really large apps. But yeah, so it's been an interesting.
So whenever you start a
problem
Blitz app and it has that little message about preparing for launch, while that is the synchronizer running, where it's like taking all your files, transforming them, and putting them into the .blitz folder. And then once next starts, and you see the logs from next, then that's where it's just the like running the dev command or whatever.
Yeah.
Or the
So
next
then,
start.
yeah. So that was the synchronizer here, and then next start. There's some interesting challenges around getting a ready event out of the synchronizer. So with that, the way we're doing it right now is just an interesting sort of thing to know about, which is that within our helpers here, we've got this, where is it actually? Maybe it's not in the helpers. Yeah, so the idle handler, that's right. So yeah, we've got basically the way we're doing it is where, because the thing is, because this could be either a watch situation like in dev, or it could be just a build situation where we're just running through all the files that are there and then we're finishing. We need to sort of know when things are finished, and so we need to know when to report that stuff is ready. And so the way we're doing that basically is we're using a timeout, and we're just waiting until there's not many files coming through, and then it's going to say, okay, yep, I'm idle, okay, and it'll either here fire like a ready event or it'll fire an idle event, and yeah, and so then they get sent to what we're calling a reporter, which is basically sort of a stream that then goes, and currently it just sort of reports stuff to the console, and it uses the nice logging stuff here, which is actually probably worth talking about. It's probably something you do want to know about. This log stuff is, so what's happening here is that a lot of stuff is actually currently like throughout all these other packages, it's currently pulling out log, and it's using log to make all this pretty output you see in Blitz. This really needs to be its own package. So one of the things I'm hoping to get to soon is to extract this out to its own display package, because it's something that I think is a bit of a spider dependency. It should be used all over the place, so that we can have like a unified experience.
That sounds good. Talk to Dylan about that too, and maybe it can be like support CLI and the GUI output.
Yeah, and then Dylan and I, yeah, we have been talking a bit about it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So yeah, so yeah, so I guess that's something that you'll see. It's in the server component. It shouldn't be there really. So if you're scratching your head wondering about that, we do plan to change it. But yeah, so I guess that's a really quick overview. There's a lot in there. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they want me to answer about it.
I do have one question myself, actually. Firstly, thank you for that. It was a really nice overview. Great job with the solution. So I actually had to shoot off partway through, so I might have missed this. And apologies if you've covered this. One part I was curious with was when I'm kind of like adding files to these mutations or queries folders. I'm keen to add my tests closely in proximity to the implementation file. And I'm kind of unsure at the moment. It feels like a bit of a black box as to how those files are transformed into the actual build, or the next build. So, for example, I'm cautious if I include a test file in the mutations folder, will that be then generated as an API route? And if so, how do I kind of prevent that? And maybe you could show us actually where the implementation is for that.
Okay, actually, I don't think we've got a filter for that. Yeah, not off the top of my head. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I can't remember if we've done it yet or not. But yeah, we probably should filter those out. We should probably filter tests out, or at least provide the ability for people to filter that stuff out. But maybe it doesn't really. It would only matter in terms of like your deploy.
It would be generated as a a route, an API route, if it's not filtered.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't want that to happen as well because of kind of how it's all bundled together. You don't want all your test libraries to be bundled with your application. And a kind of follow-up question there is, if I create a folder inside of mutations with the name of, say, the mutation, and then inside of that I have like an index and then a test file within that as well. I don't know if it's possible to mainly to say only create an API route from the index file from that folder as opposed to all the other sub-files within that folder. Maybe that's a solution, so you don't have to add a filter for any test files or anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think we've really covered that. Might be worth making an issue for it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right,
I think adding a filter for just filtering out test files would be good, because I don't think we need any test files in the compiled app.
Yeah, yeah, unless you wanted it to be have a .test on it for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a configure option to like override the default, but
yeah, I think that makes sense.
Cheers, man. Thanks for that.
Okay, any other questions on the server?
No, not really a question. Just an observation. So for me, it was, I didn't have a long look, but for me, it was kind of a little bit confusing that this is the package server. There is one or two files that really actually serve, but there's a lot of other work done. And since you mentioned already like that you want to extract some packages, just, from my gut feeling, it would be nice that, that you see, okay, a server thing, and then there is this packaging, however, pipeline thing that happens there.
Yeah, that's definitely. We've talked about sort of how we'd like to extract stuff out. There is an issue here around what the future of that might look like. I'd like to get onto this sort of sooner rather than later, because I think we just do need to get a bit of this stuff up. I've been meaning to do it recently, but I've just been caught up on work commitments. So, but basically, the idea at the moment would be to make a server manager package, and what that would be doing is that'd be controlling Next, and so that would be the job of that. And then we have a synchronizer, or it could be called something else, but at the moment it'd be a synchronizer, which is about file synchronization, and so we'd extract all that out.
Yeah, then I'm totally satisfied, that there is a discussion, and then I can have a look, and it was just, no, so let's not waste time on that now, thank you.
Yeah, and a few of those are already done as well. We've already split out the generator used to be in the CLI, and we split that out. There's one as well to split out the like console stuff. So like that's something that we've been, initially before the alpha, it was just kind of like get a bunch of code in there and try and get everything out,
get it working,
get everything working. And I think now that we've got that out, most of our like core functionality that we want to build is built. We now have some time to like rethink how everything's structured and where everything goes. So like, especially now, that feedback is super helpful to kind of know where people are confused, so we know the best places to put files and where to move stuff as we continue to kind of reorganize the code base.
Any other questions?
Yeah, no question for you, Rudy. You can probably stop sharing your screen if you want. Okay. So one thing that I have written in the contributor guide is basically saying like how our code base is a garden, and like there's weeds, or there's like pretty things, vegetables, and there's like weeds and stuff too. And so like this is a community project, and so it's a community garden. And so like if you see things that like are confusing, or if you see weeds, like feel free to pull them out, or open an issue to talk about pulling them out. And like, yeah, so we're open to like refactors, renaming, like just making things better. Like the code is not perfect at all. And so that, yeah. So just feel free to like feel like you can make changes. Don't feel like you're stepping on somebody's toes by like redoing something. But and if it's like a larger scale thing, feel free, like open an issue to talk about it like before you dump a bunch of time into it. What did you say, Andreas?
No, I was just joking. Sorry.
Okay.
And I wanted to say, just replace everything with perfect code and then.
Yeah, and then just go home.
Yeah. But since
we're
there,
all at home, so.
Yeah, I'm at home. So, but you're far. But how's documentation planned? Because we have there are some markdown files that are scattered, or just in the root of the project. Do you have a plan for that? Because I think that's the one of the really important things if there's more and more people coming on board. So
yeah, that is very true. So one thing I was thinking was to have a README file at every folder. So inside every folder has a README that kind of describes like what's happening at that level, maybe any like important things. So that's one thing. Like even with that, it'd be kind of nice to have like more like a table of contents of some way. But yeah, this is something that like we'd love some help on, and it might be a good way to kind of get familiar with the code base too, for someone else to write it, and we can like help review it if you need or answer questions. What do you think?
Yeah. What about something simple like Doxify or so? Which is just one HTML file serving a bunch of README files for not. I'm totally on board with having a README in every like package or every like thing that needs explanation, but these things like contributing or getting like how to write a plugin, that would be a thing somebody would be interested in. I don't know if you would have a folder with the README inside it.
Yeah,
where
I got you. Yeah, so we're working on the real website right now. That will have like documentation. So we'll have a website like blitzjs.com. We'll have an updated like marketing site or whatever, and then also full documentation for Blitz, and we can add contributing documentation to there too.
Okay, so that the documentation for the general stuff, which is not like documenting code or like concepts in code for the let's say core, it would be on the website, right?
Yeah.
Like
Is that what you were asking about, like using DocZ for because like we can have a separate contributing section on the website to put like as much in-depth contributing documentation as we want. But the thing is, that's in a different repo. But the benefit is that it would be translated. So anything on the blitzjs.com repo will be translated. Anything in the main repo won't.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, so open to ideas and suggestions. Okay, I don't have anything else to add. Anyone else have any questions, comments? Okay, well, hopefully this was helpful. Was it helpful? Good.
That was very good, mate. Thank you.
Good.
Oh, great.
Okay, so now you can go. Like, we can have Blitz stable ready in like a couple weeks, maybe. Huh? Everybody's building stuff. Oh no, I'm just joking. So okay, well this will be posted up on YouTube, and you can go back and watch it later. And then we can have another one of these later, like even more in depth in certain aspects if we need. So yeah, if you like want want us to do more overviews like this or things specifically, like just post in the Slack, and we're happy to set something up. Also happy. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think based on time zones, there's pretty much always at least one of us in the maintainers or core team online at all times, and so dropping a question in Slack will, one of us will always be there to jump in and help walk you through anything that you're confused about. So definitely don't hesitate to ask questions and drop your thoughts in Slack. Yeah,
and then I'm also happy to just do like a one-on-one screen share too. Like if you're like if you just want some extra help, like walking through something and getting started, contributing to Blitz, like I'm happy to do that. Just reach out to me. Okay, well, we'll end it here and hope all of you have a good rest of your day, however much is left, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.